of American pharmaceuticals, there exists something known as off-label use. Basically, the FDA approves drugs for specific reasons. But then the drug makers get it into their heads that, gosh, they could be making so much more money from the drugs if they told people they could cure more problems than the ones the FDA approved them for. And that's off-label, or not FDA-approved, use. Now, companies aren't allowed to just make up claims and then make TV commercials about them. But that doesn't stop them from encouraging doctors and pharmacists to suggest their drugs, which are approved for one thing, to patients who suffer from other things entirely. Case in point, Risperdal. Made by Johnson & Johnson, it's an antipsychotic used to treat schizophrenia and bipolar disorders. But Johnson & Johnson felt like it just wasn't making enough money from the drug, so they decided to start marketing it to the elderly as an anti-dementia drug. They paid doctors and pharmacists kickbacks to boost sales. They compensated their employees for trying to sell the drug as a dementia medication. Johnson & Johnson executives very clearly encouraged everyone in the medical community to push Risperdal for the off-label dementia use, to the point where sales from the medication accounted for 70% of their employee bonuses. Risperdal for everyone! Except that, of course, it's illegal to market a drug for something other than what the FDA has approved it for. And Johnson & Johnson knows that very well, which is why they did it through quieter channels like doctors' offices and pharmacies and PowerPoint presentations internally. But they clearly stepped out of the bounds of law. Some of the Johnson & Johnson employees felt a little crappy about selling the antipsychotic to the elderly who were just afraid of losing their minds. So they blew the whistle. A government probe ensued, and Johnson & Johnson settled for a whopping $2.2 billion. Our pharmaceutical companies have no morals whatsoever. So I'm very glad that Johnson & Johnson had to pay $2.2 billion for this off-label scam. However, considering that they have a net worth of over $60 billion, they'll be able to forget the $2.2 billion settlement like it was no big deal, almost as if they had dementia themselves. Tonight, let's talk about that by following me on Twitter @TheResident.